to bake Samuel Fraunces' carrot cake. Okay.
You will need carrots, butter, eggs, flour, sugar, cinnamon, and nutmeg. Cut the tops off your carrots and peel them. You'll need about 2 cups worth. Place the carrots into a pot of water. Let the water come to a boil, then turn the heat down and let the carrots simmer for 5 minutes. In a mixing bowl, add 2 cups of sugar and a stick and a half of butter. Cream the butter and sugar. If you accidentally melt it like we did, that makes it easier. Add 1 egg and mix until smooth. Add another egg. Mix again. Another egg. Mix some more. Last egg, I promise. Mix again until silky smooth. Sift 2 cups of flour into a separate bowl. A tablespoon of cinnamon, a tablespoon of nutmeg. We didn't measure. A pinch of salt. Stir it all together. Pour the dry ingredients into the wet. Fold them in carefully or you will make a mess. Admire your batter. Back to the carrots. Grate your cooled carrots into a weird mush. Add the carrots to your batter. Use your hands if they stick to the plate. Now fold them into the batter. Just fold them in. We can't be any clearer. Once again, admire your finished batter. Dump the batter into your greased pan. Smooth it out. You didn't do all that careful folding for nothing. Put the cake into a 350-degree oven and bake for about 40 minutes. Let the cake cool on a wire rack. Cut yourself a big old slice, topped with whipped cream, and enjoy.
Awesome. Okay. So should we just jump right into it? Okay, so start from current slide. So going into a little bit about Samuel Fraunces and his well-known carrot cake, the carrot cake was supposedly served to General Washington on Evacuation Day in the print that you see here. Now, Evacuation Day was November 25th, 1783. For those who are unfamiliar with Evacuation Day was the day that the British forces and those loyal to the English crown officially left New York City after the American Revolution. In honor of Washington returning to New York City, then Governor of New York State, George Clinton, held a celebratory dinner for George Washington over at Fraunces Tavern. So this is where the carrot cake kind of steps in. For those who haven't had the opportunity to visit our museum, this is Fraunces Tavern over at 54 Pearl Street. So a little bit about Samuel Fraunces himself. He was widely known for his cooking talents, especially sweet and savory dishes. He first opened his business here at 54 Pearl Street in 1762. But back then it was known as the Queen's Head Tavern, or after, Queen Charlotte, who was wife of then King George III. Washington was known to have frequented the tavern during his stay in preparation for the Battle of Brooklyn in 1776. Fast forward a few years later, when Washington became president in 1789, he actually resided here in New York City at 3 Cherry Street because New York was actually the capital of the new nation. In doing this and establishing his presidential household, he actually recruited Samuel Fraunces to be his household steward. So this means that Samuel Fraunces would actually be in charge of the Washington's meals. In writing about Fraunces' talents, Washington wrote a letter to his secretary, Tobias Lear, about Fraunces, saying, quote, "Fraunces, besides being an excellent cook, knowing how to provide genteel dinners, and giving aid in dressing them, prepared the dessert and made the cake." Of course, New York wasn't the capital for long, and in 1790, the capital moved over to Philadelphia, and as did Samuel Fraunces. What happens in Philadelphia is a little bit unknown because Samuel Fraunces and Washington did part ways in Philadelphia, being that he was no longer the household steward. This is in part because of Fraunces' preferred serving style. Fraunces preferred mainly an extravagant versus Washington, who preferred a more plain dinner meal. Being said, Fraunces tried to start up his own tavern over in Philadelphia, but he died, unfortunately, in 1796, and he is buried in Philadelphia. So something about Samuel Fraunces himself is that as Fraunces Tavern Museum, we actually don't have a lot of written records. If you recall back before I started the video, Mary says his supposed carrot cake recipe. That's because we don't have a lot of Samuel Fraunces' written records, especially his recipes, which is unfortunate. But kind of backtracking the history on carrot cake, I want to show you guys 2 recipes of another popular carrot dish known as carrot pudding. And modern food historians actually attribute our modern carrot cake as being descended from carrot pudding. So, sorry, just organizing my notes. One moment. So as I said, carrot cake is supposedly originated from carrot pudding. And I'm not talking about the chocolate pudding that we associate with the grocery store, but I'm talking about more traditional English pudding, such as Yorkshire pudding. So a sweet or savory dish, steamed dish made with flour. So there's a starch in it. The first recipe I want to show you folks is actually going to be from Hannah Glass's The Art of Cookery. This is from the 1774 edition. In looking at these recipes, I also want to make note that a lot of the traditional recipes are actually going to come from across the Atlantic over in England. So they're going to call a lot of English traditions and especially a lot of English ingredients. So looking at Glass's carrot pudding, she writes, get 2 penny loaves, pare off the crust, soak them in a quart of boiling milk, let it stand till it is cold, then grate in 2 or 3 large carrots. Then place in 8 eggs, which is a lot, well beat, and 3/4 pound of fresh butter melted. Grate in a little nutmeg and sweeten to your taste. Cover your dish with puff paste. Pour in the ingredients and bake for an hour. So we start to see that this is a sweet dish, and we do have a starch because we have the penny loaves, which are your traditional rolls. And then, of course, we have a puff paste, which we now know as puff pastry. The next recipe I want to compare this to is going to be Amelia Simmons' American Cookery. So this is from 1796. There is another edition, I believe, in 1798. With American Cookery, something I really want to point out is that this is the first known American cookbook. In her introductions leading up to her recipes, she actually says that this book is adapted for the American country. So this means that locals, especially the new American citizenry, should be able to obtain these ingredients. So this carrot pudding recipe is pretty straightforward. It says a coffee cup full of boiled and strained carrots, 5 eggs, 2 ounces sugar, and butter each. Cinnamon and rose water to your taste, and baked in a deep dish without paste. So it's not calling for this puff pastry or puff paste, and we are missing a starch. Like the other one, it had I believe the 2 penny loaves. So these are the 2 that I would like to compare. And being said, these were 2 popular dishes at the time. And since we do not have Samuel Fraunces' actual carrot cake recipe, the lines are kind of blurred as to whether he actually served something more in line with carrot pudding.
That's awesome. Everything was boiled, if anybody didn't pick up that little fact. Everything is always boiled in the 17 and 1800s, which just, delicious. Catherine, did you find anything from those infamous Keeler Tavern records?
As we discovered, carrots are kind of a mystery in the 18th century. They do show up in some of these different recipe books, and they show up in American Cookery, so we assume they're, American or available in America, but they really don't show up in any of our ledgers. So, as I've shown in previous Tavern Tastings, if you've been able to join us, we do have a lot of Timothy Keeler's ledgers from 1770 all the way up into the 1800s. So there's a lot of records, a lot of transactions happening, but I went through pretty much every single one I could find and found 0 references to carrots. The closest I could come was to this one single reference to parsnips. Parsnips are similar to carrots, in that they look like carrots. But we just have this one reference to parsnips in 1809 that was given to Isaac Lewis, who actually lived across the street from Keeler Tavern. And about 5 years after this, he would marry Timothy's second daughter, Sarah. So he's purchasing a whole lot of produce from Timothy Keeler in this particular entry. The thing I find so fascinating is at the bottom, you can see he's paying off his purchase to Timothy with by making 2 sets of teaspoons. Isaac Lewis was a silversmith. And we do own sets of Isaac Lewis teaspoons. So these are a set of teaspoons made by Isaac Lewis, and you can see the EK engraved on the handle for Esther Keeler. So perhaps these are the teaspoons that were meant to pay off this peck of parsnips. But that is the closest I could get to carrots in the Keeler ledgers. So one of the things I think we'll find is, I think my sound is my sound a little bit better now?
It's a little off, but I usually attribute it to the fact that you are working in a very old building that is going to always be echoey.
Yeah, I'm trying. I've got my microphone here, so I'm hoping that helps. All right, well, we'll hope it gets better. So one of the things is a place like Ridgefield is very rural in the 18th century. Everybody owns a farm. Everybody has a garden. And so my feeling is a lot of the time you're going to be growing your own carrots, and you're not going to need to trade them or exchange them. So that's why they don't show up in the ledgers, like some of the other things we've talked about that have come up in the past tavern tastings.
It's not as useful as chocolate.
Right.
What's interesting is that it doesn't seem to be as popular as I thought it was going to be. And I realized when you guys were going over your research with us was that it really doesn't pick up in the colonial times because everybody was growing it themselves. They were using it not for human consumption, right?
Yeah, that's true. We did find that carrots tended to be used not for human food, but for animal feed. It was discovered that animals, especially oxen and horses, they loved carrots. And the people, the colonists of the 18th century didn't particularly like carrots that much. And it doesn't seem to be that they didn't like the way carrots were prepared. They just really didn't appreciate carrots.
When you boil them all the time.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I couldn't find any reference, any recipe with carrots that didn't involve boiling them.
Yeah.
Until the 1900s. So you were always eating cooked carrots.
Yeah, even the modern one, the updated one that I used to make that carrot cake, it was like, boil your carrots. And I was like, okay. I think I could have just gotten away with like shred it. You know what? I was like, let me not mess with the traditions of it. But it really seems like the carrot has its moment about a century later and when we reach into the 19th century, right?
Yes. So once we get into the 19th century, we do get some more carrots show up a little bit more because in the 19th century, we really get this scientific age of farming. People start to really get into soil nutrition and livestock, diets, and how to make sure that you're getting the most out of your land. So you get this boom in periodicals, all about farming and things like that. And you get all of these references on how is it best to grow your carrots. So I will.
Oh, good. We're going to be told how to grow our carrots.
Yes, so we're going to see how to grow carrots. So the first thing is, back in the 18th century, we do have some innovation in planting, in farming, and one of the big ones is the seed drill, which was invented by Jethro Tull in England around 1733. And in Keeler Tavern's barn tool collection, we do have part of a seed drill. However, it's not the important part. We have the central frame and the back wheel, but we do not have the seed hopper, which is unfortunate.
Would love that demo.
Yeah. But the seed drill makes it a lot easier to plant these seeds into the ground in rows. So that makes it much more efficient to get things into the seeds in for your farm. And then in the 19th century, we start developing these improvements on things like the seed drill, and you get the Northumberland turnip drill, which was described by a man named John Prince in the American Farmer in 1822 as being the preferred method of also planting carrots on your farm, is to use the Northumberland turnip drill. So that's also pictured here. And these are just some of the different periodicals published throughout the 19th century. And every state had one, every county had their own. But these are just some of the ones I thought were really cool. They had nice headers and things like that. And you have like the Bridgeport Evening Farmer, which was published from Bridgeport, Connecticut, just down the road from us here in Ridgefield. So perhaps Timothy Keeler or his son William was reading the Bridgeport Evening Farmer. So we get a lot of those. And then in these publications, they tell you exactly how. So not only what's the best way to plant your carrots, but how to grow them, how to harvest them, and how to store them. Because the great thing about carrots is that they store really well over the winter. As long as you keep them cool, you're not affected by frost, then they will keep for a very long time over the winter. So what you want to do, the best way to harvest your carrots is you're going to take a sharp hoe and cut off all of the greens off the top, and you're going to feed those to your livestock right away in the fall. And then you're going to dig a really good ditch, throw all your carrot roots into that ditch, and cover it up so that you can dig it up as soon as the winter frost is gone, and you'll have food for your livestock in the early spring.
That is definitely not what I thought you were going to say. Theresa, did you find any founding fathers with any ties to carrots?
I actually do have a few notes. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were known to have grown carrots on their estates, both on Mount Vernon and Monticello. Mm-hmm. So I do have a quote here from George Washington in regards to growing carrots. This is from a March 1787 diary entry. Washington here writes, "Brought another of the muddy hole plows from Fraunces and set it to laying off the 20-acre cut design, if carrot seeds can be obtained. For carrots, potatoes, peas, and turnips between the corn, and which will be drilled in the rows 10 feet apart." So carrots were an important part of Mount Vernon's crops. And this was mainly because, not for culinary purposes, but like with Catherine just discussed, mainly to feed animals. An interesting part about this quote, though, and the reason why I chose to pick it out, was because in parentheses, he writes, "if carrot seeds could be obtained." And this is a really interesting note to make, because when he's writing this, Washington, he's actually referring to ordering various types of vegetable seeds from his agents over in London. So he's immediately trading with London after the American Revolution. Another thing about Washington and carrots is that in upkeep with Mount Vernon, because I did bring up the year 1787, that is the year the Constitutional Convention is occurring. So he is away for a few months during this year. And when writing back to overseers, those who are taking care of his estate, he actually mentions carrots quite frequently. And he mentions them in crop rotations just to keep his other crops healthy, because they do help with growing other vegetables within the area. And Washington was known to have used the carrots types, the long orange and the red horn, which were two very popular carrot types to have been grown during this period in Virginia. Skipping a little bit forward, this is Thomas Jefferson now over at Monticello. This was written in his general gardening calendar. This is one of the few quotes I could find. It refers to May of 1824, so we do time travel a little bit 2 decades later. And he just mainly writes that he recommends that carrots should be grown in the month of March. And one thing that kind of surprised me, and I didn't even consider because I just buy carrots from the grocery stores, is that carrots actually take 70 to 80 days to grow. And that kind of surprised me.
You mean they don't just show up at the grocery store? This is
That's what I thought.
I've learned 2 crazy things about carrots in the last 5 minutes, is that we put them in ditches and they don't just show up. That does remind me, because you had mentioned 2 separate types of carrots. Megan asked, we're going to go way back with this one, maybe the variety of carrots they were growing weren't as tender and sweet as the ones we grow today. So do you guys want to talk a little bit about where the carrot came from?
Yeah, that's a good question, because carrots, when they were originally cultivated, they originated from Afghanistan, but they made their way to early civilizations, primarily the ancient Greeks, the Romans, and the Egyptians make use of the carrot. But the carrot that I'm talking about is not the orange carrot, the orange sweet carrot, I should say, that we consider today. This is actually, they were primarily purple, and they came in different variations as well. They were yellow, white, and red, but they were mainly bitter in taste. And these ancient civilizations actually cultivated the plant for their leaves and their flowers. And this was mainly for medicinal purposes. So this was actually a very bitter root. The carrot that we know today, the long orange, that's very common in our gardens and our grocery stores, actually didn't come about until roughly the mid-17th century, and that's due to the Dutch. They cultivated the sweet carrot that we know today. There is a small, interesting legend that actually kind of goes behind this, and that is that the Dutch actually cultivated this plant in honor of William of Orange, who was their leader. And this is the same William of Orange as in William and Mary, like the college. So there is that small colonial connection there. So this is the first instance of this sweet orange carrot that we're so familiar with today. Just jumping on a little bit more about that, carrots actually don't reach American shores until 1709, and that is in Jamestown, Virginia. There is a quote that I found, which makes instant. I think it's one of the first mentions of carrots in North America, and this comes from 1610. This is from a document called A True Declaration of the Estate of the Colonies in Virginia. That was written in Old English, and it took a little bit to decipher. But this is one of the first mentions of carrots, and in it kind of recounts how conditions were and what crops were growing in Jamestown. So it says, quote, "What I should speak of cucumbers, muskmelons, which are now cantaloupes, pumpkins, potatoes, parsnips, carrots, turnips, which our gardens yield with little art and labor." So carrots were fairly easy, and this became a very important crop. And then carrots once again pop up in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1629. And that is because of the Pilgrims, or the Puritans, who settle in that region. Because we have settlers now and we have these native communities that are around, we do know that there was an exchange through traditional routes of trade and exchange. So carrots did go into Native American communities, but how the Native Americans decided to cultivate it is not really recorded strongly. There is one instance of a remarkable woman. I recommend you guys, if you have the opportunity, to look into her. Her name is Gladys Cataquidgen. She is a Mohegan medicine woman and anthropologist. She lived from 1899 to 2005, so that's 106 years old. Remarkable. But she does recall a long history, especially of both carrots and the Queen's Anne lace, which is the wild variation of the carrot, being grown in North America. And her people typically use the Queen's Anne lace, so the bitter wild carrot, for medicinal benefits, and especially in regards to using it to alleviate issues that relate to diabetes. So I said, someone please spell her name, so I'll write that in the chat for you guys.
Catherine has this really interesting medicinal use for carrots that we found as well.
Oh, yes. Before we move on, I did want to mention about the Queen Anne's lace. So it is the wild form of the domesticated carrot, and the root can be eaten when it's young. However, the plant looks nearly identical to poison hemlock. So I suggest you don't try to eat it just in case. Just putting that out there. And it's actually because it's a wild form of the domesticated carrot, which was brought to the United States from Europe, it's actually still considered an invasive species in some areas of the US. So actually, we did have one reference here in Wakefield, the local paper in the 1880s, actually published an announcement out to the farmers that per state law, they were required to rip up all the Queen Anne's lace on their properties because it was considered invasive. But other medicinal uses for the carrot is, we did have one that I thought was really interesting, which is it was believed to be an antiscorbutic, which means it could potentially cure scurvy. And Captain Cook, in the 1770s, when he was making his explorations around the South Pacific, actually took about 30 gallons of carrot marmalade with him as provisions for his crew in an effort to ward off scurvy. So on his second voyage to the South Pacific, he took these 30 gallons with him, and he was told that carrot marmalade would cure scurvy from a gentleman in Germany named, his name is Baron, Baron Storch of Berlin, and Baron Storch provided this recipe for carrot marmalade. So you can see, you squeeze the juice out of the carrot, the grated or hatched carrots, and boil it immediately thick without any addition of water until you get it like really syrupy. And then you preserve it that way. But it will not keep more than 12 months, he says. And James Cook, in his journals, he does say that it didn't seem to work really well, but he only lost one man on this 2-year journey, and it was not to scurvy. So who knows? Marmalade. Maybe it was the carrot marmalade. Maybe it was something else.
It's definitely the carrot marmalade. Definitely. No other possibility.
But the reason you can make carrot marmalade out of carrots is because there's a very high sugar content in carrots. And actually carrots have not only fructose, which is the sugar you find in fruits, but actually sucrose, which is basically table sugar. And so it was believed that you could possibly make sugar out of carrots. And I did find one reference that said that during the American Revolution, when the British Navy was blockading American ports, so we couldn't access Caribbean sugar, that people in America were making sugar out of carrots. I only found one reference, and then I did find another essay written by a Scottish doctor who said he tried to do that the same way you would make sugar out of sugar beets, and it didn't work. However, this doctor was able to make a liquor out of his carrot juice. He fermented it, and he was able to make a liquor that he said, this is what he said about the fermented carrot juice. The taste was by no means displeasing, as it much resembled malt liquor. From a gross calculation, I am induced to think that a good acre of carrots manufactured in this manner will leave a profit of 40 pounds. And an acre of barley will by no means produce so much spirit. So he believed that maybe you could earn a little bit of profit by growing carrots for carrot liquor over regular barley, malted barley liquors. So
Still boiled though.
still boiled. I don't think carrot liquor ever took off anywhere.
Oof. Can you imagine trying to do a demo with carrot liquor? Ooh. Now I'm really glad we went with the cake. So the carrot starts gaining traction in the 19th century. Everybody kind of starts using it. We're looking at it a very scientific eye. And then does anything happen kind of around the Civil War? We'll jump ahead. I think Theresa mentioned it also has another medicinal purpose, right?
Yes. So actually, during this time period, carrots aren't really seen as a culinary kind of food that we think of today. Looking at older cookbooks, I did find one recipe. Throughout the various cookbooks, I tried to find a recipe in the 19th century based on carrots. I did find one. It was one mention, and carrot wasn't even the main ingredient. It was just a substitute. And this comes from the 1839 cookbook, The Kentucky Housewife. And the original recipe was for yam cake. Sorry, not yam cake, yam pie. But she said if you do not have any yams, you could just easily substitute it with carrot. And that was the sole mention of carrots in that cookbook. And even then, carrots are kind of, because Catherine was just talking about carrots being very sweet, they were mainly used as a sweet dish. They weren't used in any, there were some carrots that were used in savory dishes, but they were mainly used as a sweet dish if they were being used to be cooked with. They're barely mentioned throughout culinary books or readings. Carrots kind of step into the scene very briefly during the U.S. Civil War for both the Union and Confederate forces. And this is because, kind of like Captain Cook using the carrot marmalade to defeat scurvy, they did this. They had little compact cans, and they would have cut up vegetables. And these dried vegetables would actually include a lot of carrot content in them. And they were given to soldiers as part of their rations. Now, the soldiers on both sides greatly dislike these carrots, these dried up carrots, and they actually refer to them as bird food. So it wasn't very popular, but it kind of went along the same lines as it was used as a tool to defeat disease and scurvy in camps, in army camps throughout the U.S. Civil War. Okay. So otherwise, yeah.
Carrots still doesn't have a good rep in the Civil War. When do carrots start getting a good rep? When do they start becoming like cool and hip, like baby carrots that cover my fridge because I have a toddler?
So carrots kind of get a revive, especially in the culinary aspect, around World War II. But just to backtrack just a little bit, because I want to bring up one carrot type. In 1871, this is first listed, this is known as the Danvers carrot. This is known as the first American cultivated carrot. And this was grown, of course, in Danvers, Massachusetts, which is a farming town. What's interesting about this, though, that I kind of want to bring up is that Danvers was originally known for growing its onions, and carrots were grown to help kind of flourish that onion crop. What's interesting about this is if we kind of backtrack to Amelia Simmons' cookbook, she actually originally recommends when she's talking about different types of vegetables to grow your carrots next to onions. That way they could flourish. So it's kind of cool that this advice is kind of being translated a generation or two later. So just a little note on the first American carrot. But like Mary said, the carrot does start to gain some traction in World War II. And this is in part because of this saying that we all know carrots are meant to help your eyesight. Now, there is some scientific grounding in this, and that is because carrots are very rich in vitamin A. And vitamin A is supposed to help your eyesight, especially in dark environments. So the English government, so this notion kind of originates over in the UK, that they wanted to use this notion to get the British citizenry to kind of eat carrots. So in order to foil the German air raids that were occurring in World War II, the country would issue blackouts. So the British government actually issued a statement to its British citizenry to eat more carrots so you could see better in these blackouts. And the people believed it because of their high amount in vitamin A. But this also had two kind of double meanings behind it as well, in order to help with this nighttime blindness to see in this blackout. It was because the government was also facing food shortages at the time, and carrots were a very easy obtainable crop for the population, and they were also very easy to grow. So this would help with the food shortage to make sure everybody could eat within the country. The other reason, and this is the more interesting reason I found, was because carrots, because they were so rich in vitamin A and they could help you see better in the dark, is because the Royal Air Force during this time period was actually developing a new airborne radar to help the Royal Air Force see better in the dark when they were flying their planes. And in order to keep enemies at bay and not kind of find out this new intelligence, they kind of promoted this idea that the British Air Force, their diets were rich in carrots, and that's why they were able to see better during these nighttime flights. So it was a way to kind of get enemies off their scent, as well as to kind of dampen the food shortage that was occurring within the UK. So I actually do have two pictures I want to share with you guys about this carrot propaganda. If I could find my mouse, sorry. So give me one moment. Okay, so I'm going to share this screen. Okay. So carrot propaganda. What we see right over here on my left is a poster. Now, this is not actually a British poster, but this is actually an American poster. It's courtesy of the U.S. National Archives. So this idea, this notion that carrots could help you see better at night and help your eyesight actually does cross the Atlantic. So we start to see this done in World War II propaganda posters in the U.S. Now, something that might have caught your guys' eyes when I brought up this screen is this cartoon character, Carroty George. And I don't know if you could see the little name right up here, but that is Walt Disney. So the British government actually reached out to Walt Disney animators during this time period to create a character to kind of relay this information, this statement to the British citizenry, to kind of promote this idea that carrots, you should grow them. They're good for you. They're good for your eyesight. So they reached out to Disney animators. This carrot that you see here, his name is Carroty George. He was drawn by animator Hank Potter in 1942. Now, Carrot George isn't the only carrot in this cartoon collection. He does come from a carrot family. There is also Carroty Pop, and there is Carroty Clara, but I couldn't find clear pictures of them, unfortunately. So there were a family of cartoons that were used to promote this idea that you should eat carrots. And with this, you're going to see on the corner over here, it says, "See leaflet." So the idea was to put Carroty George and his family all over flyers and posters, and especially on little recipe books that you could hand out to people so they know how to bake with the carrots. And one of the interesting things I found in looking at this was that they actually put a recipe for a 1740 carrot pudding. So carrot pudding was kind of going through a small revival with Carroty George. Yeah, exciting stuff. But unfortunately,
I'm almost famous again.
But unfortunately, Carroty George wasn't as popular. I mean, we don't see him at the Disney parks, of course, but he wasn't actually as popular as we would have liked him to be, and that's because the British Ministry of Food and Agriculture actually decided to go with their own cartoon character named Dr. Carrot. I don't have a picture of him here, unfortunately. So Carroty George kind of gets pushed to the sidelines, and it's actually unclear how popular Carroty George actually was with the British public. But it's pretty cool that they kind of recruited Disney, a well-known name today, to kind of create this carrot cartoon.
That's adorable. Jamie C. dropped the link from the Carrot Museum, ladies and gentlemen, for the Carroty family. So We found them. I have no segue, but Catherine also has some really fun illustrations of carrots. So I think we picked a great theme for this month because I don't think I've ever laughed so hard doing walkthroughs for this. So I'm going to hand it over to you because I think the general public needs to see these.
All right. So I was trying to find, because every month I want to try and find, artwork of our theme. And, some of the past themes have been very easy to find artwork. If you joined us last month for cider, there's, a lot of artwork about cider making and things like that. Carrots is a little bit more difficult. And I did find it does show up in European art, especially in the 17th century. There's a lot of still lives or scenes of marketplaces showing carrots being sold. I could not find any American artwork, but I really did want to show this picture, this etching in particular, because I just thought it was hilarious. This is Italian artist, Pier Leone Ghezzi, and this etching is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's titled "A Monk with a Carrot and a Woman with a Chamber Pot."
Oh gosh.
This was a very humorous take on the carrot, but most of the European art was very, very tasteful images. And then in the 1844, we get this very interesting piece. This comes from France, and it's from this hilarious book of illustrations by J.J. Granville called An Autre Monde, or Another World. And if you've ever read Voltaire's Candide or Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, it's kind of a mix of both of them. This story is about this man named Dr. Puff who travels the universe with two companions, and they discover all these other worlds. And one of those worlds was a place in which the vegetables rose up against humankind, but their revolution was unsuccessful because a civil war broke out between the sugarcane and the beet, and the carrot ended up having to intervene, which is what this picture shows, which I thought was very interesting because sugarcane and beets are two sources of sugar. And then, as we discussed earlier, carrots attempted to be a source of sugar, but we were not able to refine the sugar from carrots. So I just thought that was a kind of interesting connection between these three particular vegetables in this image. But if you do read French and you have the chance, you can actually find this book on archive.org, and it is absolutely hilarious. So I do encourage you to look for it if you can. I couldn't find a translation, so I apologize, the Google Translate of some of the text there.
This is the best thing we've ever put on here. It's like a really adult version of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs.
Yes.
You love it. So carrots are not quite as colonial as we thought. No, right?
Not.
No. They find their moment. So they get pretty popular in World War II. Logic behind it. So the carrot cake that we eat today, when you go to the bakery and you get a carrot cake for somebody's birthday, when did that happen? When did we become carrots need to be in cake and it's going to be delicious and we're going to lie to ourselves and pretend that it's healthy?
Well, the first trace I found of carrot cake actually being called carrot cake was, I believe, in 1824, and that was in a French cookbook. But carrot cakes, as we know it today, with either the whipped cream or the frosting, probably didn't gain popularity until maybe roughly about World War II, once again, with this revival of carrots being, they're good for your eyesight. Let's find different ways to cook with them. So that's probably where we see our beloved carrot cake appear into the mainstream.
I do highly recommend everybody try that San Francis carrot cake. The recipe was shared with the registration. It's fairly simple to do. It took me a cool 3 hours because it takes about 45 minutes to an hour to bake, also because we were filming it and I'm not a professional, as everybody can probably assume about me. It does taste very good, and depending on the amount of kind of carrot you put in, it doesn't taste like it. When you're eating it, you don't think, oh wow, San Francis made a really good cake. It tastes like a modern day cake, and I guess it's because of the additions that they've made for it, but it's good. Nobody boil carrots for fun, guys. Just don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
I did see somebody else commented that they have, where is it? There's a small Pennsylvania distillery that makes a carrot eau de vie. I like the beet eau de vie much. Okay. There is carrot liquor being sold on this coast. I'm not going to try it. I'm going to be honest. That's wonderful. Does anybody have any? Oh, it's called Boardroom Spirits. Okay.
Right.
Now, does anybody have any last comments about carrots? Everybody's favorite root vegetable. Did everybody learn something today? I hope.
Yeah, I thought it was just really interesting looking, carrots kind of pop up throughout history, but they never seem to like stick around in popularity until you get this really, concerted effort in World War II. So that was very interesting. And I mean, I think it's also really interesting that even in what's called a salad recipe, the carrots are still boiled. I found a 1672 recipe from England called for a vegetable salad, and it used cauliflower, carrots, turnips, beets, or parsnip, boiled and then dressed with oil, vinegar, and pepper. So, even what we think of as a salad, which was raw vegetables, nope, you're going to boil everything first before you can have your salad.
Boiled salad, everybody. Alta would like the link to the French reference. So this is going to be recorded, so if you'd like to go back to it for our thank you email, we could definitely include all of the sources for the imagery that Catherine and Teresa have provided as well, because I'm going to go look up that French book as well tomorrow, because I think it's my favorite thing.
So I put the title in the chat. I don't have the link to drop in there off the top, but I did find it on archive.org, which is a great reference for a whole bunch of historical research. So if you just search it there, it should pop up for you.
Very exciting. This was wonderful. I don't see too many questions coming in, so I'm going to leave it to Catherine and Teresa to do some final closing statements on carrots, and then maybe we can drop some hints for next month's Tavern Tasting as we close out.
All right. There was so much to know, Diane. Yeah, that's one of the great things about these programs is we get to do research into these one particular ingredient, which is always really interesting.
I do love coming back and going, what did you find? Every 2 weeks we're like, what did you find?
Yeah.
And if you guys have the opportunity, I definitely recommend looking at Hannah Glass's book from 1774, The Art of Cookery, and Amelia Simmons' American Cookery, which is the 1790s. Those are two great resources for colonial cooking, and it was very interesting to kind of shift through the books and like compare especially carrot pudding recipes, which leads to carrot cake today. So it was kind of cool to trace that history.
Okay, so thank you everybody for coming. look out for that thank you email as well after this lecture. You can go back and watch this again and learn even more things about carrots and go home and tell all your friends about carrots. On behalf of Keeler Tavern Museum and Fraunces Tavern Museum, we want to thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with us. These are very fun to put on, and we could not do them without an audience like you guys. We really, really, really appreciate it. Even though we cannot be together in a personal space, these Zoom calls make a great opportunity for us to reach out to the Keeler audience and for the Keeler audience to reach out to Fraunces Tavern. This was wonderful. Stay tuned next month. We are going to be doing African American foodways, which is something I am very excited about. So look out for that registration as well. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.